a boy finds himself in an abandoned place. He said he was thirsty while observing bones on the ground, wondering if he was really going to die there like that, until out of the corner of his eye, he sees a place with water. The sight makes him run in that direction, and frantically he begins to drink, feeling relieved because he would have almost died if it weren't for this. But strangely, a tooth falls from his bloodied mouth. Seeing his hands contorting, he wonders what is happening, who he is, and since when has he been there in the middle of that wild place? Why was he wandering aimlessly and dying alone? Why are his flesh and bones melting? In the midst of all this despair, a voice asks if he remembered what to do if he wanted something. Frightened, he turns, asking for salvation. He knew he was wrong and begs to be saved. All he wanted was a bit of mercy. When suddenly someone says that if he is sleeping, he cannot notice that the master is there. Finally waking up, he realizes he is in front of a beautiful woman who says she has no choice but to punish him. He kneels in front of a girl in a red dress, saying he understands her words, that she is Lady Lena. Lena responds that now that he is awake, he could beg for mercy. With tears in his eyes, the boy approaches and licks her shoes, asking her to forgive this humble person and save him. Smiling, the girl acknowledges that he is a good boy and tells him to come closer. In his memories, the boy recalls that when he was dying, it was Lady Lena who took him in, even being a beast with no place to sleep. Lena gave him all this plus food and warmth, and he was only able to survive by depending entirely on her. The warmth was better now that he had nothing to worry about. It was a pleasure for him to entrust his body and soul to Lady Lena's leash. And that is why she is his heaven and his hell. Face to face with Lena, he wonders why she is not caressing him as usual and just staring at him. Seeing Lena approaching silently, the boy sobs in fear, until she finally asks the boy how old he is. He responds that Lady Lena's beast is 2 years old. That makes the girl thoughtful, and then she tells him to go to bed, also handing him a vial with green liquid. The gift leaves him confused, but Lena explains to drink what was in the vial because she herself is not feeling well. Seeing her leave, he wonders why he is being abandoned like this when they always said he was a beautiful and adorable beast. Sobbing in tears, he asks Lena if what she gave him was poison. He was desperate to know if she no longer needed him. Lena explains that it was actually an antidote to the drug he consumed. And with that, she leaves the room. However, he cannot understand her words. After all, he had tried his best and begged every day. He worked hard to be loved, and therefore could not understand why she did not want him anymore. Outside the castle, a carriage stops. The butler says that Miss Ileana seems to have returned. She looks at the maid and says she wants to go to her room. Approaching the door, Lena says she doesn't want dinner because she is going to sleep, and closes the door before the maid finishes saying goodnight. Lena falls to her knees on the floor before sitting in a chair, thinking that now that she gave the boy the antidote, he shouldn't have nightmares anymore. The boy named Magnus became Ileana's beast at 20 years old, even though he said he was only 2. That made Magnus 22 while she herself was 23. And according to the original story, Lena will be dead in 5 years at the age of 28. So she needs to find a way back no matter what it is, because it seems she was possessed by the novel's villain. Lena continues making notes in the room and remembers that she shouldn't have sent that email. In the hardest moments of her life, she was always reading this novel about a villain who took a boy she liked and raised him to be her personal beast. Using a forbidden drug besides her special powers, the villain completely destroyed his mind while keeping his body intact, making the only warmth he knew hers and no one else's. And that is why everyone believed he would be a beast that would never run away even without a leash. But the beast breaks his chains and manages to escape, soon finds another woman and falls in love, and with that he is saved. Eventually, the beast becomes a human and returns to his place of origin, ascending to become an emperor, making his beloved the empress. Sometime later, he finds the villain who put him in that hell and pushes her into an abyss worse than death. Reading that story made her feel like she was escaping her reality, and so she became completely immersed in the novel. However, she sent a message to the author, saying that the ending of that story tormented her. That didn't seem like a happy ending. She longed to understand more about the relationship between the beast and the villain. It was like an open ending with many things to be resolved. So she sent numerous emails to the author in search of those answers to her questions, but she ended up regretting sending them after she received a response. The author said that she was correct, but he also didn't know. She found it strange how someone didn't know about a novel he himself wrote. That's when he stated that she herself should show a new story personally, and she sent a message saying she would be very happy to do so. That's when she fell asleep and woke up as the villain Ileana Glane from that novel. Ileana hoped she had acted well a little before as the villain she was supposed to be. After eating, she gets up and tells the maid to clear the table. Upon waking up after the first night, she was sure that none of it was just a dream. Standing at the table, Ileana reflects that this was a strange novel due to the pace of the story, until the maid approaches and informs her that today is the tea party of the Marquess Daisy. Since this was a third-person narrated story where you only have the observer's point of view, it was impossible to know many of the things that were going to happen. The girl is exhausted because normally when you go to a novel, you know everything that happens. But in her case, nothing was explained, and among all the things she was curious about, nothing was explained. Ileana orders the visit to the Marquess's tea party to be cancelled and surprises the maid, and continues saying to cancel everything she planned during that entire week. The maid hesitates for a long moment before agreeing with her mistress's orders. Ileana is still not used to bossing other people around, but it is necessary. She orders the other maids to prepare a bath for her. They throw rose petals in the hot water before Ileana can immerse herself. The maids help her undress, and Ileana thinks she was not used to this kind of treatment. After that, the maids leave. This makes Ileana find the situation strange because normally they should help her bathe. Maybe they don't help because she is just a Marquess's daughter and not a princess. Putting that aside, Ileana decides to enter the water that seems good. And that's when she noticed that her leg is full of bruises. Really, she didn't even know about herself. Everything she saw in the mirror was new to her, including the fact that the maids didn't let her do anything alone. They applied the lotions and did her makeup, as well as her hair, and tied her clothes. Everything was strange and uncomfortable for seeming a bit too much care coming from them. It was as if Ileana was as delicate as an elderly person, not to mention that she didn't know the language of that world, but still was able to read and write without difficulty. When a maid brought the tea and served it, Ileana approaches to ask for a favor and tells her to bring the boy who was using the drugs, but without letting anyone know. Agreeing with her orders, the maid left. Ileana knew she would have to start fixing Magnus's drug addiction before it was too late. She imagined that the reason she had taken over the villain's body was because she had to change the end of the original story. Otherwise, she would remain trapped in that body. All she would need to try to do was atone for the sins of the real Ileana. She begins to question what will happen if she manages to save Magnus. Normally, she would prefer to stay home quietly, but remembering the marks on the villain's leg, it became questionable whether she would be safe in that house or not. Even if they don't realize she's not the real Ileana, that wouldn't mean she could be out of danger. What she wanted to know the most is what kind of life this woman had been living until then. Was this domestic abuse, or was she hurting herself? Why did she become the villain in the first place? It was frustrating to have a bunch of unanswered questions. Sighing, Ileana decides to leave everything aside for now because there was something more important at the moment. A while later, Magnus was in his room as ordered by the maid. Despite being uncomfortable seeing his smile, Ileana told him to get up off the floor, calling him by the nickname Mag. Ileana named him that while he himself calls her Lina. Magnus himself recognizes himself as her beast. That's because he is addicted to a drug called High. With her dream manipulation ability, Ileana managed to tame him. Ileana holds him by the wrist, reflecting that since she is not the real Ileana, it means she also cannot use dream manipulation. All that remains is the drug addiction. She tells Mag that from now on, he no longer has to kneel when she appears. As soon as she woke up as Ileana, she had given him the antidote out of pity. Ileana's order shocks him, and Mag falls to the ground, begging for forgiveness and admitting his mistakes. Unfortunately, Mag has been addicted for 2 years, and a small dose of antidote would not be enough to cure him. The boy insists that he will correct his mistakes and pleads for her not to discard him like this. In tears, Mag claims to be aware that it was all his fault and that he would reflect on his actions. Ileana clarifies that she was not going to abandon him and that she was merely giving a new order. Feeling a caress on his head and hearing her words seems to calm him. The lady helps him sit on the bed and informs him that she brought someone to check his health. She tells him to close his eyes and stay still. Magnus obeys without hesitation, and Ileana turns to call someone in. a man with a deformed face named Carl appears in the room. Even with his eyes closed, Magnus seems to recognize this name, but he remains as Ileana ordered while Carl touches him. Observing from a distance, Ileana feels hesitant, but she believed everything would be fine as long as he kept his eyes closed. There would be no way for anyone to recognize Magnus's true identity. The symbol that only some members of the imperial family possessed were their characteristic golden eyes. It was impossible for a noble like Ileana not to know its meaning, and knowing this is why the villain must have taken him. Ileana's thoughts are interrupted when Carl claims to have finished. She then tells him to leave and asks Mag to open his eyes again. The boy blushes again upon seeing the lady until she says she will leave now. This leaves Mag disappointed because she intended to leave just like that. Ileana doesn't quite know how to get out of that situation, especially when Mag prostrates himself and begs her to stay. After all, he has obeyed everything she ordered and endured everything that happened since then. But Ileana knew he would repeat that behavior and silences him by covering his mouth when she sees him cry, reaffirming that he didn't commit any mistakes and thinking it was all the fault of the villain Ileana Glean. The lady tells him to rest that day, and he agrees, despite looking like an abandoned puppy. Seeing this pitiful scene, she decides to caress his head and face, to which he responds with a smile and leans into the touch. That seemed to move her heart for a second, until Ileana turns around, just saying she would see him again later. And the boy could only watch her leave the room and agree with her words. Outside, she went to Carl and asked how Mag was. The man replies that Mag was still addicted to the drug called High. Realizing that Carl had hit the diagnosis right, she asked for the details. Carl said that it was a very dangerous drug usually used to tame slaves. However, the boy was quite well for someone who had been addicted to it for 3 years. Apparently, the person who tamed him controlled the dose very well. Ileana inquires how they would get rid of the intoxication, and Carl warns that in half a year, taking antidotes and avoiding the drug, it might be possible to cure such a person. However, there is no perfect antidote, and that amount of drugs would force the patient to fight the addiction on his own. Ileana was confident at this point because Magnus himself escaped the drug without even needing antidotes in the original route. So she asks him to prepare enough antidotes for half a year, as she would cover the costs of the necessary materials. When Carl agrees that he could fulfill her request, Ileana responds that it was great because she would compensate him with 50 gold bars if he recovered perfectly. However, this was a secret that should not leak out in any way. If anyone started to suspect anything, Ileana promises to ruin Carl's future by any means necessary. The carriage withdrew with Carl saying he would take that secret to the grave. And with that, Ileana left, saying she would prepare an advance payment for him. On the way back, she calmed down and took off the mask, thinking that all this was very difficult. By habit, her accent and tone of voice didn't sound strange, and she wonders what she should do about these situations because it was far from her original tone of voice. That's when she remembered just intending to stroke Mag's hair until she unconsciously slid to touch his face as well. In the future, Ileana had no intention of continuing to use drugs or brainwashing. In 2 years, she would help him return to the Imperial Palace. The coachman asks if they should return to the mansion, while Ileana wonders what she should do to make them doubt her. The answer surprises the coachman until the lady finally orders them to head to the temple. This coincides with Ileana's journey to the Temple of Red Neva, where a blonde-haired boy asks if she believes in Red Neva. But she remains silent and smiles. In the crowd gathered around the temple, a man runs and shouts for everyone to get out of the way, and asks what brings a noble child to those temples. With a radiant expression, Ileana responds that she came to pray in the embrace of God, and awkwardly continues mentioning that she didn't want to cause any trouble to any of the believers there. The blonde man complies with her wishes and says it is not a problem to have her there and guides her inside, while everyone in the crowd seems to recognize Ileana Glean without knowing the reason she went to the temple when she was a noble. The temple was a place that only welcomed commoners, and they judged Ileana as a beautiful woman who seemed friendly. It delighted Ileana that no one knew her true personality, and thus she had a good reputation. Originally, Ileana did not hide her greed in front of Magnus, but she was seen as a good person to the public. All Ileana did was manipulate others verbally to avoid getting involved in problems that weren't hers. A typical sociopath without regrets. As expected, Ileana would need to seek this redemption in place of the original villain. so she decides she will become a dedicated believer. This is the best she can do even if she doesn't become a nun. The church boy opens the door for her. Ileana notices that there are not many people there, but it will be enough to spread the rumor that the only daughter of the Glane house started attending the temple. The blonde man asks if it's her first time there, and Ileana replies that it is, explaining that she met God not long ago, and recounts that Red Neva appeared in one of her dreams while she was sick with fever, and upon waking it seemed like nothing had happened and her body was healed. The boy smiles back at her story and states that God protects believers. She says that perhaps that was the case because she felt as if she had been reborn with the blessing, and now she is there to share his benevolence and compassion with more people. Even though internally Ileana knows it was all a big lie and she felt a little bad for lying to God like that. But she has to become a believer no matter what happens. One of the only organizations independent of this empire was precisely the temple. It was a place that even the emperor could not touch, and thus at least the believers there had the freedom to think for themselves. That's why she wants to be recognized as a worshipper in case she needs help. The churchman stops in front of a door and says that this is the prayer room, and explains that the box in the middle is for donations, but she is not obliged to do so if she doesn't want to. However, those who donate above a certain amount receive a certificate of fidelity to the religion. That caught Ileana's attention because it was exactly what she needed. So she responds that she didn't have much to offer and could be more generous and bring more on the next visit, despite taking out a giant and humble gold bar. The church boy almost gets emotional seeing her. While his eyes shine, Ileana continues mentioning that she would keep attending the church and making donations. This makes him fall to his knees and start praying like a madman, leaving Ileana a bit confused. After trying to call him a few times and not receiving a response, he finally turns asking for forgiveness and explains that he was thanking Red Neva for guiding such a wonderful person like Ileana there. Let's face it, even I would pray with happiness if someone showed up with a gold bar in front of me. Until the man hands over a temporary member card, explaining that the certificate of fidelity would take a week to be issued. With this, she could walk freely around the temple. Ileana inquires what she should do now, and the man replies that she could put the donation inside the box and close her eyes to start praying. Following his instructions, Ileana folds her hands and makes the donation. This was an elegant posture that came naturally. They were habits she couldn't forget. Even though she is getting used to this new body, Ileana prays for everything to go well from now on. That's when she felt something strange running down her spine like a chill, turning pale as a ghost until finally returning to the carriage. The coachman approaches and informs her that they would be returning to the mansion, and Ileana agrees, giving a sideways glance as she inquires if he remembers what she had said earlier. He agrees that it would be prepared without any error, although he is curious to know why she desires so many books. Ileana explains that she wants to send them to the cabin and thinks to herself that it is all to help Magnus escape. Meanwhile, Magnus wonders why Ileana left him alone in the darkness in a cabin with 2 guards keeping the entrance secure. After all, he was afraid to stay in a place like this. The fear makes him fall to his knees and continue to ask what he did wrong for Ileana to treat him this way. In Ileana's room, a maid suspects that something was strange. The books that disappeared suddenly return to their original place. This should be natural, and the other maid asks what the first one found so strange. She explains that some books had been missing for over a week and had not returned until then. The second maid assumes that the lady might have just forgotten to put them back on the shelf. This does not convince the other woman because 10 books disappeared at once. But the conversation is interrupted when they realize that Ileana finished her bath and needed their assistance. A week passed, and Ileana did not give Magnus any new books or visit him. Time was passing quickly. It was unknown to her how irrational the situation was, but if he was smart, he would have immediately noticed the drugs. Ileana watches the maids take care of her appearance as usual and recalls that Magnus originally learned about the world through the books she gave him. The last one was essential for him to escape. She considers that things were happening faster than in the original novel, and therefore everything should work out. All that remains is to wait for Magnus's escape, and she also had to take care of those bruises on her own body. when suddenly one of the maids screams for Ileana and reports that the Lord and Lady are back after the territorial inspection. This surprises Ileana, but she tries to remain calm on the outside while the maids help remove the bracelet and necklace she was wearing that day as a precaution. Ileana wonders what the maids must think of her now and if they pity her life. She can feel her body trembling as she asks how Ileana treated the Marquess. Despite being visibly nervous, Ileana asks if the Marquess wishes to see her. The maid denies it but says he suggested they have dinner together. With that, she leaves, saying she will prepare the carriage for the trip. Descending the stairs, Ileana thinks she will do at least what is within her reach and then go see how Magnus is. Besides, she needs to see how the antidote's progress is in his body. Considering that she hasn't seen the Marquess and his wife despite living in that house for a week, it seems they were not there often. Suddenly, a man appears behind her, asking where she was going. Immediately, Ileana bows and turns to the man and recognizes him as her father. The Marquess is an elegant man with white hair who demands an answer for her departure. Ileana states that she was leaving to go to the temple, and the Marquess asks the reason for this as it was an unusual action for her. He warns her, reminding her that there is still dinner that night and that she should know better than anyone that he hates those who are late. Still in the same respectful position, Ileana responds that she will always keep that in mind. A while later, one of the maids approaches to alert the arrival of the carriage, and despite the tension in her body, Ileana says to depart immediately. After the coachman states that he would be taking her to the cabin, Ileana closes the curtain to have a moment of privacy inside. Then she crouches and sighs, feeling her feet and hands cold, experiencing a great wave of nausea and body aches, which was certainly a reaction to excessive fear. However, this was not her original body but the villain Ileana's, and this only makes her more anxious to discover the truth behind that character. She needs to find a way to get those answers. She doesn't want to be held responsible for things she didn't do or let herself be carried away by the emotions left behind in this body she possessed. Ileana has to accelerate the whole process with Carl and ensure that Magnus recognizes his own freedom so that everything returns to normal. But she never expected Magnus to kiss her suddenly, even though she had rejected his advances, and she wonders how things ended up like this. 30 minutes earlier, she had arrived at the cabin and talked to Carl about Magnus's situation after a week. He states that Mag was better, but would need another half-year with the elixir and everything would be resolved. This does not satisfy Ileana, who insists on asking if there could not be a quicker resolution. And Carl denies it once again, explaining that there is a limit to how much can be consumed in a day. But Ileana is aware that this is a lie and that Carl is possibly worried that his usefulness would end too soon. Thus, he would be discarded and even killed. In the end, Ileana just continues to emphasize to Carl that he should keep planning his own future and do his best in his work to fulfill his part of the agreement. Ileana cannot believe it would take so long for Magnus to be cured, because in the original story, he was able to escape 3 months after Ileana gave him the books, even though he was still completely addicted. Upon entering the cabin, Ileana meets Mag and hears him greet her and say everything is fine. She recalls that in the novel, he was always described as a genius, but now he was in this situation, kissing her feet. Magnus asks if he did something wrong for her to take so long to see him, while Ileana can only notice how his eyes seemed clearer with sanity. Ileana holds Mag's face and helps him stand up, affirming once again that he did nothing wrong. Even though she can still smell the drug on him, Ileana's touch on his face makes Mag lean into her caress as he did before. But her mind is worried about how long it would take for the brainwashing effect to wear off, considering it would take half a year just for the drug. That's when Mag asks why she doesn't try to do anything with him, like kiss or hug him. This surprises Ileana because he began to be able to ask more direct questions instead of agreeing with everything. Ileana's reaction makes Mag quickly apologize for his boldness. But Ileana insists that it's okay and smiles, praising him for doing a good job in his recovery every day. Magnus is moved by the lady's words and calms down after seeing that she is not angry with him. Ileana thinks that this is much better than seeing him agree without even hesitating for a moment with everything she says. Then she asks if he would like to be with her, and Mag hesitates, turning his face away. Ileana asks him to be honest because she wants to know what is going on in his head and hear his opinion. After being tempted to speak for a moment, the words still don't come out. This worries Ileana that maybe she is pushing too hard, until Mag timidly says that yes, he would like to be with her, and the answer is powerful enough to leave Ileana herself in silence. She didn't expect that and was so impressed that her jaw dropped a little. This reaction makes Mag recall some of the words that the villain Ileana had manipulated into his mind during the brainwashing, saying that whenever she opened her mouth in front of him, it was because she wanted to be kissed. She would demand that Mag act like a beast and kiss her feet the way she wanted. Ileana is unaware of these memories and remains confused by Mag's delayed reaction and asks what the problem is, until he approaches and holds her by the chin to kiss her. Ileana is surprised again and tells him to wait, pushing him away despite Mag's resistance. He insists on repeating that he didn't want to be discarded and would continue being the animal she wanted him to be, starting to kneel to kiss her feet and ankles in a way that made Ileana understand that it was all part of the brainwashing by the former Ileana at work. Ileana nervously raises her voice for him to stop, and Mag interrupts what he is doing to look at her. This moment is ideal for Ileana to move her foot away from Mag, blushing intensely after what just happened. The reaction makes Mag tense and ask if he is doing it wrong, which surprises Ileana once again. He tells her that Ileana always said he was her beloved beast and that he felt cold without being by her side. Approaching her again with tears, Mag reveals that he only feels warmth when Ileana is by his side. It was impossible for Mag to bear that terrible loneliness. Finally, Ileana's mind reflects that Mag must have endured everything alone in that cabin, all day without being able to talk to anyone and only sharing Ileana's company. But now the Ileana who read romances and was her past self wanted to change that and felt she ended up in that story for some purpose. So Ileana approached and hugged Mag even though he was still crying, saying that she would hug him and that he should calm down. Ileana could not continue to blame herself for the past, and it was clear that Magnus must be confused and worried. He hesitated to hug her back, even with Ileana saying it was okay, until they both embrace, and Mag murmurs that he likes Ileana and that he is her beast. But her mind denies all this because she knows it is all part of the brainwashing by the villain Ileana Glean, making him think and act this way. Ileana responds that Mag is not a beast, and to her surprise, he pushes her roughly out of the embrace. He says with an intense expression that he is indeed a beast, and the only one of Ileana. After hesitating for a moment, she insists that he is like her, but Mag's reaction is to appear even more hurt than before. For 3 years, Magnus's brain continued to be broken to the point where his memory had deteriorated. He couldn't even remember what happened before he was captured, and that's why Mag cultivated a giant obsession with Ileana. So she decides to change the subject and mentions that there is food outside and asks if he wants to join her. Ileana wonders how she can change this because her future and survival depend on it. Mag asks in return if she will stay by his side with the expectation of her company. Hesitantly, Ileana agrees that she will stay until night. This makes him prostrate himself again and thank her before kissing her feet with clear satisfaction. But Ileana frowns, realizing that he must always thank the old Ileana in that way. In the end, Magnus promises that he will listen to Ileana properly so that she is not disappointed. And despite being tense about the situation, she just stands up to ask for the food to be served. Mag's behavior is always unpredictable, but the big problem for her is her body's reaction to him. She feels her heart pounding uncontrollably in her chest after everything that happened, and these were bodily reactions she did not expect. This was a separate reaction between mind and body that caught Ileana off guard. But the main question was whether the villain Ileana loved Mag, and if that was the reason her body reacted that way to him. Although she finds it hard to believe that this is the answer to everything, as these persistent feelings always confuse her too much. When Ileana went out to ask for the food and returned a little later, she ended up being surprised by the sight of Mag. He was sitting next to a chair and says that he just sat down to wait for Ileana as she had ordered him. Ileana sighs in a way that leaves Mag confused. She wonders why he sat on the floor instead of the chair when it was empty to eat, as if he were really a dog. With a nervous shiver, Ileana asks if he always sat like that on the floor. And he agrees, remembering the malice in the way she fed him on the floor like a real animal, saying that Ileana usually did this when she was angry, and this makes him ask if she is angry now. She hesitates before denying his question and telling him to sit in a chair like any other person. Despite his complaining, Ileana says he should not forget what she said before, that he is not a beast. Magnus has no choice but to agree with her orders until a man enters the cabin to serve the food for the day. The sight of the man serving the food on the table makes Magnus anxious, and he asks Ileana if she intends to leave after eating with him. He insists on knowing when she will come back to caress him as she did before, although Ileana's mind only wonders when he will try to escape after going through so much. Ileana promises that she will be with him most of the time the following week, and this reassures Mag, despite a dark feeling taking hold of him. It begins to get dark when Ileana leaves the cabin and leaves Mag alone for a moment, reflecting that the escape period for Mag in the original route was 1 year. Ileana offered the books for him to read much earlier than in the novel so that he could discover the world even faster. She hoped he would escape in a month or, at the latest, in 2 months, and considers that it would be better to keep her distance from Magnus during these days, and it was the best thing to do. The following week, Ileana would be engaged and could not continue appearing to care for and visit Magnus. As soon as he escaped, she could dissolve the mercenary group and burn the cabin to put an end to everything. Ileana thinks that if Magnus and the heroine of the original novel are destined to be together, they will surely meet during his escape. Now the plan for his escape was almost ready, and Ileana knew she only needed to start the religion stage. So she returns to the carriage and orders the coachman to head to the temple. Upon arrival, the blonde man from the church asks if she was looking for a congregation. Ileana replies that she would like to become a more devoted believer to feel the will of God. This makes him happy to help her despite there being no religious congregation there, but it could happen if a new sanctuary is built. His eyes soon shine with excitement when Ileana makes her offering of a gold bar. She asks how long it would take for this to happen, and he replies that it would be about 2 years, which seemed enough time for her. So she asks the blonde man, when he stands up, if she could join a new congregation, and he pauses before asking if she wants to become a bride of God. Ileana is a bit surprised before saying that she wants to get closer to God, and this time it is the man who falls silent at her answer. His reaction makes Ileana worried that she said something wrong, but the blonde man finally smiles and says he is happy to know she is forming a bond with God. Ileana is relieved and agrees with the man about getting involved with God, even though it is a bit late. The man offers a rolled-up paper and explains that it is a request for a fulfillment of conviction. He would like to give her more time, but unfortunately, the registration deadline is only that day, and it wouldn't be difficult to gather all the necessary documents. The preparation time is 2 weeks, and he asks if that is good for her. Ileana takes the request from the man and reflects that the preparations for the trip are sufficient, but the case of Magnus is still complicated. She asks when the next action would be, and he says it is within 2 years. This makes Ileana tense to the point of gripping her dress, wondering if Mag will be okay during that time. Everything she is teaching is to prepare him, and she hopes that Carl will take care of Magnus in the meantime. Ileana believes that Mag will be fine without her and tells the man she will see him in 2 weeks because she is eager to see the sanctuary. When she returns to the mansion during the evening, Ileana finds several servants running and carrying things from one place to another. She even sees a broken vase in the commotion and asks what happened to a maid who came to greet her at the entrance of the house. The maid explains that there was a problem on one of the estates and the Marquis is packing his things for his next trip, and so he had to leave in a hurry to check the situation of the territory again. Ileana sighs and says that everything is fine and that she will not have dinner that night and will go to her room. The maid agrees with her orders and wishes her good night as she watches Ileana walk towards the stairs. While heading to her room, Ileana keeps looking at the broken vase and reflecting on the situation. She feels that she needs more information and looks for more in her books to prepare Magnus as much as possible in those 2 weeks. Ileana has to find a way to know what will happen, but she ends up getting frustrated as she searches the room and finds no diary. She searches the drawers in the room, thinking that there should always be secret spaces inside. After feeling around in the drawer, she finds something that catches her attention, and Ileana discovers a hidden notebook. The writing in the notebook records events from the imperial calendar on certain dates and marked times. On November 5, 1927, a lost animal was found, and on the 6th, a golden dragon was found. Ileana reflects aloud and wonders if the golden dragon is actually Magnus, and if this is the villain's diary. Looking for more information inside the diary, she is surprised to find something written in her diary. This is because they are in the year 930 of the imperial calendar, but it was written that on November 13, 931, the beast will escape from her hands. The discovery makes Ileana uncomfortable to the point that her hands clench tightly on the pages of the diary. Continuing to read, it is narrated on April 4 that Ileana gave the book to the beast and the golden dragon was finally chosen to receive the crown. On July 24, the villain checked the missing antidote on the way home, and the time seemed to have come. On September 6, Ileana instructed the mercenaries to treat the beast well and release it. On November 13, the beast managed to escape, and a kind-looking woman took care of him when she found him. It was shocking for Ileana herself that the villain had allowed that escape on purpose, and it was even stranger to reflect on this. Possibly Ileana Glane had foreseen Magnus's escape from the beginning. After all, she always carried an antidote in her hands and made it clear to Mag when they met. Until the day he stole the antidote and Ileana acknowledged his disappearance. The diary's accounts seemed as if they had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and the Ileana of now felt as if something very wrong was happening. On December 24, 927, the culprit who abandoned the beast turned out to be another golden dragon, and on June 4, 928, it was reported that Ileana might die. On October 8, the beast was still smiling at her, and Ileana felt as if he might pierce her heart someday with that face. On July 14, 929, the beast asked her a question, and on January 12, 930, she decided it was time to tell the truth to the beast. Now it was clear to Ileana that none of this could have been unplanned. It was all a process to tame Magnus and make him come back for his revenge from the beginning. It was a shocking discovery that almost made the current Ileana feel sick. But the question of who owned this diary popped into Ileana's mind at that very moment. Obviously, the writing was done from Ileana's point of view, but her notes seemed as if she could see the future. Given that she had the ability to deal with dreams, this was certainly a possibility. Ileana herself considers that her former self must have had some other plans in mind, and her goal shouldn't have been just to keep a diary. She finds the last page of the diary and begins reading immediately. On August 18, 935, it was the last page Ileana hid when she was exiled, and she wrote her last words there. To Ileana's frustration, even on the final page, there was nothing that could explain what should have been written. Ileana was nervous because such writing was something only a writer who likes to tease their readers would do. It was still strange to her that the writer did not know the answers to these questions, and it was also difficult for Ileana to do this alone. How could she find the answer in that diary? Why did Ileana plan this from the beginning, and what were those marked dates? Was it because Ileana loved Magnus and wanted to give the throne to him, or was there more behind it? She did not fully understand the villain Ileana's reasons, and it seemed that the novel didn't simply end with her death. Magnus discovered Ileana's identity and executed all of her family in front of her eyes. Ileana was trapped in a life that no one knew, and apparently, not even the author knew great details about it. Even if Ileana loved Magnus, would such a sacrifice be worth it for that love? Thinking too much about this only made Ileana feel exhausted, and she takes a deep breath, deciding to continue the investigations the next day. At least she was able to solve the day's problems, and so she could sleep a little better after a long time. Meanwhile, a great commotion was happening inside the cabin. Magnus started convulsing, and those responsible for him rushed to help and use the medicines to aid him. One of the guards asks if they hadn't administered the morning drug, and the other is confused because Mag was an addict, and it wasn't uncommon for him to have convulsions like that. If something like this happened, Mag always said to give him the medicines, and that was exactly what they were doing now. Magnus could only think of Ileana because he was suffering and thought he was going to die. He remembers Ileana's words to stay by her side and thinks he couldn't be anything other than a beast. Mag believes Ileana was being kind by telling him he was human, and he questions why he can't leave the cabin, even imagining that he could kiss Ileana's feet if he ever got out of there. After Mag's caretakers finish their work, they leave him on the ground when his convulsions stop. He remains on the ground mumbling for Ileana and feeling cold because that loneliness always haunts him. Tears appear in his eyes, and he quietly begs for someone to warm him at that moment. Until someone's hand touches his shoulder, telling him to get up, and this surprises Magnus, making him open his eyes immediately. But instead of Ileana, it was two men standing there, yelling at him not to stand around like a fool. Magnus is stunned by the scene of the men saying they went hunting in the forest, until Mag finally recognizes them as his brothers, starting to have a memory of his past as a prince. The black-haired man states that they would recognize Magnus's talent if he captured a decent prey during the hunt. The two men, with black and white hair, walk through the forest after Mag gets up to follow them. The white-haired one asks what they should catch today, and the black-haired one suggests a deer that looks like Magnus. They were clearly mocking their brother because the deer was a stupid and weak animal that they could easily compare to him. Magnus gets nervous because killing innocent animals for fun was far from what he would support. Then the two men stop walking and stare at him intensely, asking if by chance he is incapable of hunting prey. The black-haired one asks if he wants to be recognized as their little brother, and Magnus quickly tries to correct himself because he really admired them. Until one of them hits Magnus's chest with a basket and complains that they would never recognize him because he was always carrying stupid books. The black-haired man holds the basket Magnus was carrying and notices that the ladies always had a special care for the youngest. Magnus cannot say anything while the two mock him and the commoners he associated with. And not only that, they throw the snacks on the ground and stomp on them in front of Magnus's eyes, causing him distress. But he cannot say anything to stop it. The brothers enjoy the abuse, and the black-haired one mentions that none of this matters because Magnus won't see him starting the next day. After this pitiful scene, he orders Mag to stop being an idiot and hurry up to join them during the hunt. Even being called a little dog, he has no choice but to agree with his brother's words. Later, these same brothers were pushing him against a cliff and threatening him with their swords. Magnus trembles as he backs towards the cliff, asking why they are doing this. The black-haired one mocks that he is indeed annoying and surprises Magnus by pushing him off the cliff with his own hands. This brother who pushed him laughed, telling his little brother to have a good life even after throwing him to be food for the beasts of the forest. When he woke up, a hand was touching his face, and Mag was sweating nervously as he held the arm of the person who was touching him. His hand gripped the person's arm, and they said that nothing happened. Everything was fine because it was all a dream, and he could calm down now. This person was Ileana herself, who was taking care of Magnus, and asked if he was okay. A little after this interaction, Ileana left the cabin and heard Carl's reports that Mag was attacked and had been unconscious since then. Carl said everything was fine because his resistance was high and no medication was necessary at this recovery rate. He had withdrawal symptoms, but there were no life-threatening risks. Ileana was still shaken by the news and reported that she would return home now and that an employee would deliver the payment to Carl. She proceeds to explain that he would not need to come back to that place, looking over her shoulder and hoping she wouldn't need to repeat her words a second time. Ileana's threat made Carl nervously fidget with his sweaty hands and agree that this would never happen. The two go their separate ways, and Ileana sighs after the tension of that conversation as she stops in front of the cabin again. She enters and asks if Mag had managed to calm down after sitting on the bed to breathe for a while. Magnus agrees with her and looks away, appearing nervous and thoughtful about something. He stands up and leans against the wall while Ileana approaches him, noticing that he is still sweating a lot. As usual, Magnus smiles when she touches his face, but soon his smile fades and he becomes distant again. He mentions that it has been a long time since she last visited him, and Ileana explains that she had been busy all that time. Mag looks away and responds that he understands her situation because he is not the only one in Ileana's life. This was an interesting reaction, and Ileana thanks him for his understanding, although he had certainly changed a lot during that time apart. His appearance had improved, and the smell of the drug ray had disappeared with the effects of the treatment. Ileana steps away from him to go to the books on the table and asks how often he had been reading. Magnus takes a moment to process the answer before saying that reading was enjoyable like in a dream. Then he asks why Ileana says he is not a beast, but she remains silent for a moment before answering that he is obviously a human. Magnus's hand moves to touch Ileana's shoulder when he asks if he shouldn't like being a beast because, after all, he read in her books about how people couldn't stay together forever, but if they were owner and pet, things were different. Magnus brings his face close to Ileana's ear, explaining that animals were the only ones who could stay with their owners until death separated them. That's when Ileana remembered asking Carl how to get rid of brainwashing. He said that brainwashing couldn't be undone at will, and there were times when it could last a lifetime. Carl assured her that if Ileana was so desperate, there might be a way to fix it. To get rid of brainwashing, new orders should be given in place of the old ones. Hearing this made Ileana think that it would be the same as acting like the old villain Ileana. Using this method was a hypocritical point that made Ileana reflect on how the old villain did this to achieve her own desires. But there was a chance that the brainwashing was even stronger than she imagined, and she wondered what would happen if she left without fixing Magnus's mind. And now Mag himself hugged her from behind, confirming that he would never betray Ileana if she kept him close. Ileana did not change her serious expression and wondered how considerate she could be with him in that state. She held Mag's hand and asked if he didn't want to be human, only to hear a firm no from him. Magnus believes that becoming human again would mean leaving Ileana, and he would hate to be away from her because he loved her. His sweetly spoken words made her smile slightly before asking why he loved her. He begins to explain but then freezes, realizing he can't find any reasons. Ileana observes Magnus's internal crisis of unanswered questions with pity as he searches for answers to his love that doesn't exist. She knew it would be impossible for him to smile at her again once the brainwashing ended and the truth was exposed. Still, she could feel that burning feeling inside her whenever she was around Magnus. Sometimes she considered that those emotions were remnants left in that body that reacted to his words. Ileana responds that there is no need to worry about that and that he needs to accept the fact that he is a slow person. Gently trying to guide his mind in the right direction, Ileana lifts his face with her hands so that he looks at her. Ileana herself didn't know how to help Magnus when it was the original owner of that body who caused those problems. But she still wanted to be able to assist in breaking the brainwashing. Ileana holds him by the shoulders and asks if he would like some tea, then helps him up after getting his agreement. While she served tea with cookies, Magnus asks if he could stay by her side if he became human. She briefly responds that it's possible, but this doesn't seem to fully satisfy him. Pushing the saucer towards Magnus, she suggests they talk better over tea. After seeing him sit at the table, Ileana considers an event that currently seemed impossible for the present Magnus. This is because he would brutally murder his two brothers in a few years and become the most feared emperor in history. The reason he killed them was never reported in the original novel, and although Ileana did not know what triggered this event, it was a fact that Ileana would need to escape from the man who would become a cruel emperor in the future. Even with these thoughts, Ileana's attention was making Magnus embarrassed but happy at the same time. Mag asks how long she will stay by his side and is content when Ileana tells him she will stay until nightfall. He even sighs with relief when she says that Carl would not be there that day. Ileana's mind was working on the mysteries of that world in parallel with their lovely conversation. It has been a week since she discovered the original Ileana's notebook, and since then, she has been searching for an answer to the writer's question. Only when Mag was hurt and lost faith in Ileana did he manage to escape, and for this to happen, she would need to create the perfect escape conditions. She wonders if she should hurt him to force him to go home, but that was not an idea that pleased Ileana at all. And yet, she decides to say nervously that she is tired of Magnus and doesn't need him anymore. It was a great shock for the smiling Magnus, whose happiness faded in seconds. Ileana says that she hasn't visited because he means nothing to her, and that was the original reason. Magnus is stunned to the point of dropping his spoon and falls completely silent. Uncomfortable with her own words, Ileana insists that there is no point in being together that day and gets up to leave the table. She suggests that he rest while she goes away, leaving him behind at the table while still reflecting on her words. But Magnus grabs her before she can leave, with tears in his eyes, asking if she doesn't love him even after promising they would stay together. He insists that she promised to stay until night and begs her not to leave now. After a moment of silence, Ileana pulls her dress from Mag's hands and repeats that she doesn't like him and tells him to let go of her. The rejection makes Magnus continue whimpering and begging for Ileana, and she wonders if this still wasn't enough, and if repeating the actions of the old villain, Ileana, was indeed the only way to erase the brainwashing. While the coachman outside feels a few drops of water falling and realizes it's starting to rain, Ileana strokes Mag's head and tells him to calm down, helping him up while consoling him. she realizes that she couldn't really act like the old villain because, in reality, her actions were crimes upon crimes. Touching his face and letting him cry on her fingers, she reflects that she was being quite unfair and cruel to him. In a week, Ileana would be leaving for priestly training and would leave him behind, even if he wasn't fully prepared. Magnus asks her to hug him despite Ileana's denial and insistence that she doesn't like him. The boy hugs her anyway, surprising her with his actions taken on his own accord. He asks if it would be different if he weren't a beast, saying that if they switched places and she were his beast, they could always be together. Ileana is perplexed by his words as the rain continues to fall outside and lightning flashes in the sky. The lightning illuminates Magnus's frightening face as he states that he would never leave Ileana and has always been thinking about it since the day the line changed. She feels his hand holding her hair until she grabs his wrist and pushes his hand away, smiling and responding that she couldn't believe he was so different. But Magnus insists firmly that he would like her to visit at least once a month and cries again, asking her not to leave, saying it's the last time. He clung to her even knowing her answer, and his pleas made Ileana's heart ache. Even so, she knew she wasn't the target of Mag's supplication, nor the owner of the pain he felt. And that's why it was better that they separate for real this time for the sake of both. With this decision in mind, Ileana held Magnus's hand and smiled, telling him to take care. Seeing her leave in the rain without looking back is what broke Magnus's heart, making him beg repeatedly for her to come back. He apologizes, saying it was all his fault and that he would never do any of it again if only he could see her one more time. Ileana quickens her steps in the rain, repeating mentally that those feelings and pains weren't hers. She desperately prays for those emotions to disappear because she could barely bear them as she runs toward the carriage, until she finally kneels in the rain and covers her head, begging for these emotions to vanish. After a moment of silence, she gets up, thinking she only needs to live as Ileana for 2 years, and all this will be over. As she is escorted by the coachman under his umbrella, Ileana considers that her relationship with Magnus has ended. Days pass, and the journey for Ileana to leave the capital for the first time begins. She witnesses people and children saying a prayer to the god of the church during her journey, and everyone seems to be having fun around her. Ileana mentions the pleasant weather, and a short-haired, black-haired woman named Shulia agrees that the city of Khotan is like this at this time of year. Shulia runs to hug the lady from behind because she was eager to help her answer all her questions and assist her with everything she needs in Khotan. But Ileana herself is not very happy with the attention and responds that she has no questions before asking to be released at once. The girl makes a fuss because Ileana was cold, even though they had only met once in the carriage. Ileana smiles, pretending sympathy because she was trying to keep her distance from Shulia on purpose. But Shulia doesn't give up and pulls Ileana by the hand, saying she is determined to get closer to her during the training now that it's the first day of priestly training. The girl is full of energy and drags the exhausted lady with so much happiness all over the city by force. Before, Ileana thought her routine would be boring like any religious practice, but she never expected her days to be so hectic. She was always running through the halls after Shulia, who kept her close during the training. The two quickly arrive at the training room, and Shulia sighs in relief as she sits at the table because they arrive before the priest. Her excitement wilts like a flower when she sees Ileana sitting on the other side of the room because she had no intention of getting close to other people. On the third day of arriving at the village of Khotan for priestly practice, Ileana realized that everything would be very hectic. From 6 to 10 in the morning, it was prayers and classes repeatedly, with only a 10-minute break. If it weren't for Magnus's case, Ileana herself felt she would have fled to the capital at dawn. She could feel everyone's attention on her, and therefore always needed to remain as discreet as possible in the classroom. After all, Ileana was an aristocratic spirit serving the church and a calm lady to a noble priest. Despite the excessive attention, all the students remained silent, which was good because Ileana wasn't someone who liked to deeply engage with others, and she simply hoped time would pass quickly while she remained there. The days passed normally during priestly training. Shulia and Ileana were walking together when the former asked if the lady would go to the auditorium to watch the speech of the new apprentices starting in 20 minutes. The two walked together chatting, and Shulia acknowledged that Ileana was indeed conservative like a noble lady and should act as all nobles did. Ileana found it silly and felt that despite always making her lack of interest clear, Shulia insisted on continuing the conversation. It was when Ileana surprised Shulia by stopping walking and suddenly saying she would pass by the dormitory. Shulia asked if she was feeling okay, and Ileana explained that she had just forgotten something and could go ahead for now. They waved goodbye to each other as they parted ways, and Ileana sighed in relief when she was alone. That's because Shulia was kind of strange and always reminded her of someone with a hair color similar to Magnus. Memories of the boy made her wonder how he was doing after that day. Although Ileana was being informed once a week, she found out that Mag's overall obsession had improved. Apparently, one day he asked about Ileana and mentioned that he couldn't sleep well because he felt cold every night. Thinking about it made Ileana touch her own chest and wonder when that feeling would disappear. While reflecting alone with a tense expression, she suddenly hears a voice shouting something about heretic. Another voice responds that they only asked for help in secret, and the conversation catches Ileana's attention because it was coming from the back of a building. She approaches to eavesdrop and sees hooded figures talking with a new priest. One of the hooded figures asks what he found, and the priest recounts that they learned that the black letters were more than myths. They were the devil's language and expressed in many ways, but ultimately symbolized only one thing: the forbidden prophecy. The priest asserts that it was real and the legendary Bible was indeed able to predict the Empire's future. Ileana's attention is immediately caught upon realizing that this was an event never reported in the original novel. She quickly hides behind the house when the attention of one of the hooded figures turns in her direction and almost notices her. The conversation continues about how they were determined to find and get rid of the book as soon as possible. One of the hooded figures draws his sword, to the surprise of the priest, stating that he had information he should never have known. And now that he finished his work, the priest was no longer useful. Ileana is shocked to realize that they attacked the priest and killed him, letting his bloodied body fall to the ground. She crouches on the ground after witnessing the priest's death, covering her mouth in horror. The sword-wielding figure suggests creating a scenario so that this doesn't bring trouble to the temple, and another man agrees with his lord's orders. The swordsman believes that a story of robbery and murder would suffice as long as they add more stabbings to the body. While the men deal with the priest's body, the swordsman rushes to look for who was hiding next to the building but finds no one there, which brings a dark smile to his face. Ileana had run away in despair and cold sweat after seeing such an absurd scene. She stops to catch her breath when the realization that the priest had died for knowing about a prophecy sunk in. She didn't even know whom to tell about what she had just seen to do something, until she hugs herself, realizing she couldn't tell anyone because the killers were already in the temple. If she hadn't been caught yet, it was better to keep silent or she would end up in danger. First, she tries to calm down despite holding her head in nervousness, because otherwise she might end up meeting Magnus again and getting killed. She returns to the library to read and sighs tiredly as she touches her forehead. Since then, Ileana has been trying to learn more about black letters and prophecies, but never found anything about it. In a common fairy tale, a villain would appear, and rumors would be that he was the root of all evil due to the existence of a prophecy. Descriptions of his appearance and assumptions about the location of the boundary were also different. Ileana only managed to find that the book and the prophecy coincided in the writings of her research, albeit very vague. It was said to be an old story known to everyone in the Empire, and possibly that was why it was never mentioned in the original novel. She decides to start borrowing some books from the library to continue studying more about the prophecy. It wasn't the first time something unusual happened, because recently she discovered Ileana's diary. This was another factor that never appeared in the original novel that worried her and made her continue wondering what the connection was between all this. Ileana passes by two students talking about the new priest and how he was attacked by thieves while transporting donations and was found dead on the city corner. The tense expression on Ileana's face worsens as she sees rumors spreading that the culprit for the new priest's death hasn't been caught yet. This was something the new priestess Ileana couldn't do or get involved in. She had thought she could go unnoticed going to Khotan to study, but problematic and dangerous things continued to follow her. On her way back to the dormitory, she ends up being silently observed by someone. Ileana was pressured enough with Magnus's case that she didn't want to get involved in other problems. Meanwhile, Magnus was in the cabin in his bed and felt cold during his sleepless nights. He cries alone because it's dark, and he's always punished to suffer like this. But what scared Mag the most was the series of nightmares he had, intense enough for him to grab the bed sheets. It was as if he was losing his mind with that feeling of abandonment. Magnus was hurt and angry because Ileana shouldn't have abandoned him. He knew that no matter how much he called her, she would never come, and it would have been better for him to continue as a beast that only kills people. In irritation and indignation, Magnus gets up and ends up slipping alone on the floor. This reminds him of mocking words about how he was poor and stupid Magnus. These voices make him keep crying and covering his ears, screaming in ignorance. He didn't know who this Magnus was and didn't want to know any of it. It was when he opened his eyes in surprise and he knelt down to realize that was how Ileana called him. The name Magnus Decloud comes to his mind like a light of consciousness, and he can only look up at the sky in reflection. A low laugh escapes his throat when Magnus decides to find Ileana, even though she made a mistake abandoning a beast that became a human. 3 months pass when a report reached Ileana's hands, and finally Magnus escaped from the cabin as expected. In the original story, Mag stayed at someone's house after his escape, and that person took care of him with all her heart. Later, that person became the Empress and was none other than the novel's heroine. There was still a year's difference between the current time and the beginning of the novel, but Ileana hoped it would be a good thing. At least it was able to calm her nerves a little after all the recent events. While Ileana stretches to improve her spirits, suddenly a bucket of water is thrown over her head and she has a delayed reaction to it. The person who approached from behind to play this prank and excuse themselves that it was accidental was Simeon. Ileana laughs because even soaked, her appearance was beautiful, and this comment didn't please Simeon much. He asks if she's pretending to be stupid with this reaction when there are drops of water running down her face and hair. The lady looks away as she clarifies that Simeon was certainly smart enough to know that the books she was reading were all borrowed from the library, and so she could pass on that whoever caused damage to them was Simeon himself. This caught him off guard and irritated him. Simeon mutters that no one would care if those stupid books were damaged, despite Ileana keeping her calm. She stands up and carries the books as she passes by Simeon to leave under the tree. With a somber expression on his face, he asks if she didn't want to become a priestess, because if Ileana desired that, she couldn't live with a book like that all the time in her arms. Simeon determines that she shouldn't insult them and think herself more important just because she was born into nobility. He certainly thinks that Ileana wanted something going there, even though he couldn't see the tense expression on the lady herself. The boy accuses her of pretending to believe in God with some other goal in mind. Ileana feels that hostility was similar to when she went to school for the first time, and that was a common reaction from her classmates. She responds to Simeon that she understands the feeling of discomfort and makes it clear that she didn't intend to take anyone's position there. Simeon had mixed feelings about the noblewoman, as he heard her say that he should understand her side if he really followed that faith. Ileana asserts that he couldn't justify bullying with his faith, especially when he certainly wished to become a new priest. This sermon makes him fall silent as he looks at Ileana over his shoulder as she walks away. It was a situation Ileana wasn't used to dealing with, but above any trivial quarrel in the church, the issue of the assassins was more important. As there had been no suspicious approaches since that day, Ileana wanted to believe that everything could remain calm during that remaining time, although she felt anxious. 1 year and 8 months pass, and a man observes the 2 princes desperately fleeing something in the forest with a gentleman in escort. The man recognizes that one of them was the crown prince, and that both were being hunted by none other than the 3rd prince, Magnus. Observing without interfering in the chase, he questions if this was a common power struggle when another man appears beside him. The blonde-haired man next to him responds that while it's not uncommon, he might be able to prevent it. This causes the black-haired man to shrug and smile, stating that the strong survive and become emperors. That's always been the general rule of the empire. The blonde asks if this isn't a somewhat bestial mentality, and the other rises, saying they still don't have all the power they need, but the results will show tomorrow. Meanwhile, the 2 princes were running quickly through the forest for their lives. The escort knight shouts it's dangerous for the prince to run beyond that. Soon, the The two stop running when they realize they're facing a steep cliff. The escort tries to negotiate with Magnus that if he touches them, it won't end in just an incident. Magnus approaches them with a laugh as the knight mentions it, as if he were plotting betrayal. The third prince asserts it's quite simple, as they were only hunting since that location was especially significant. The two princes get irritated with the youngest, and the blonde gestures, asking if he sought revenge for what they did to him in the past. Magnus approaches, saying it's not about that, and only creating a story that the prince and his group went hunting but were killed by a fierce beast. And not only that, but during the escape after the escort's death, the two princes fell off a cliff to their deaths. Beside Magnus, a dark wolf with 4 golden eyes appears, roaring towards the men on the cliff's edge. The blonde prince shouts it's ridiculous and protests Magnus daring to defy him when he would become the next emperor. His reaction steals a dark smile from the third prince as he touches his own lips with his index finger. Magnus suggests his brother be silent as the beast gets wilder the more it's provoked. The wolf lunges at the two princes, and thus they fall off the cliff under the satisfied gaze of the prince. With bloodied paws, the wolf approaches, asking if Magnus is pleased with his revenge carried out. After all, Magnus was his contractor, and soon power would be in their hands. The prince immediately denies the question as it's just another step to achieving it, and thus it wasn't enough. The wolf accepts the caresses of his contractor and replies that his decision pleases him, because that way he could see how far his despair would take him. The wolf's shadows soon dissipate into the air under Magnus's hands, and he lets out a deep sigh. Meanwhile, Ileana was asleep on the table before being startled awake by another person in the library. She wakes up and asks Julia how long she slept before hearing it was about 30 minutes. Ileana lies back on the table and yawns, while Julia acknowledges she must be exhausted after the university exam. Soon it would be time for Ileana to return home, and so she walked impatiently enough to not be able to rest. After Simeon's bullying the other day, she had to endure that treatment and heard very little about the Black Book. But thanks to Julia's presence, the bullying with Simeon had decreased a bit, and so the lady could feel grateful. Julia asks if Ileana did well in the test to be so relaxed at the table, and she vaguely agrees. It was when Julia handed over some papers to the noble with news that would be of interest to her, as a lot had happened while they were trapped inside. Ileana reads the news with a pale face upon discovering that the emperor had died and the prince's case was complicated. Julia tells her that the princes went hunting together some time before his death, and the next day they found him dead under the cliff. But fortunately, the third prince reappeared after a year, and the former emperor named him as successor before dying in bed. Ileana realizes Magnus did indeed kill his brothers, and Julia worries how tense she seemed now. She suggests she should rest in her room with Ileana's own agreement. She felt dizzy as she walked back to the dormitory with Julia. This year, Ileana turns 25 while Magnus is 24. There was little time to erase all the scars from recent events, and Ileana was worried about what would happen after leaving there. Ileana steps away from Julia and assures her she would be fine resting alone. Still, the unease in her chest didn't disappear even with Magnus at a distance. Julia interrupts their walk and mentions that the coronation ceremony would soon take place in the capital, and if Ileana left, she could witness the event firsthand. After hesitating for a moment, she replies that she would think about it, although she never wanted to see Magnus again. She clenches her fists, considering that she could only see him from afar at most. She was determined to never be with him again. As time passed, the royal coronation ceremony began in the capital. The crowd of nobles grumbled because they couldn't do anything to stop Magnus's coronation, despite accusations of him killing his brothers. Rumors about him spread throughout the palace about how many aristocrats decided not to support him. But still, everyone must show respect during the coronation ceremony and bow when it is complete, and Magnus Decloud becomes the new emperor. Everyone prostrates to him under the powerful sunlight, and even the commoners outside shout "Long live the emperor and glory to the empire." Meanwhile, a churchman lectures that everyone has worked hard during this time, and it was a pleasure for him to conduct the graduation ceremony for the priests after 2 years. Ileana and Julia listen to the graduation speech while the coronation continues, and both Ileana and Magnus have their new achievements. Later, Ileana leaves the church and climbs into her carriage before instructing the coachman to head straight to the mansion in the capital. She is later greeted at home by her servants while, in parallel, the aristocrats salute the new head of the household. And so both are honored upon their return to where they should be, with Magnus and Ileana's reunion looming not far away. To ensure you don't miss the unfolding of this romance, give a gentle tap on the notification bell, and I see you on the next tale.